it's the idea that like a lot of people will do psychedelics or do self-exploration and realize they're God, but then they stop and they don't do it enough to realize that so is everyone else. And it's truly terrifying because I think a lot of the difference between what people perceive as Eastern philosophy and a lifetime of meditation is you earn this capacity to be in this state over lifetimes. Whereas psychedelics, some people call it a cheat code, where you can just immerse yourself into this higher level meditated state. And I don't disagree with that idea, but you still need to learn how to be in that place, because if you don't learn how to accept and how to move with the river, then it can be a very, very chaotic experience.
Welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I'm your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master Sun Qing, and I've got a doozy today, a very interesting insight, an incredible master of many ceremonies, and has gone down the exploration of really how to open your consciousness from all different types of angles. Welcome to the podcast, Adam Tapp. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm actually kind of excited to do this interview because, in my podcast, I've interviewed people, Buddhists and people from that sort of Eastern mindset philosophy, and I see significant overlap. And so when you invited me on your show, I was like, this is going to be a really interesting conversation. So please orchestrate said conversation, my friend.
Yes. Well, why don't we start with just a little basic sort of like overview of how you got to where we're speaking of today, sort of a little background of Adam's exploration to get to the point we are here.
Yeah. So, I'm in my 40s now, and I've been a paramedic for 20 years, and I feel no one can really psychologically prepare themselves for what you see in that career. And it's not every day, it's not constantly, but you see things that invoke a very significant emotional response, but in that moment you're not able to express it. Our job fundamentally as paramedics is to some degree create organization in chaotic situations, and it doesn't leave you room to explore these feelings, to express them, and more often than not you just suppress them. You bury them deep inside. And 10 years into my job, I was having crippling back pain, no self-awareness, sabotaging relationships, self-harm in the way of alcohol and behaviors and everything. And a friend of mine who had used a African psychedelic called iboga to alleviate a very significant opioid addiction. He had gone down to Mexico and had this profound, grueling psychedelic experience and got off like a very significant opioid addiction. And so at the time, iboga was not scheduled in Canada. It still isn't, but there's restrictions on its use. And so he wanted to help other people with it. But if you've been a polydrug addict for a decade or two, chances are you have some physical complications. You could have had minor heart attacks from cocaine use. There's a variety of things. And so he wanted some medical oversight. And I was intrigued, and he suggested I take a microdose, which is a sub-psychedelic threshold dose. And I took it, and all of a sudden it was like merging through me. And I'm like, I need to experience this compound in its significance. Part of me just underneath the surface was like, you need this. We're doing this. It doesn't matter what you think or what you say. And so I had a full experience of iboga, and it was like 14 hours of just looking at myself properly, like, really explore my vulnerabilities. And it was scary. It was, I equate the experience to all of my emotional memories surrounding my career, and even every other memory I've ever had that's negative has been basically dirty laundry thrown in a hamper, wet, and it's festering and it's dirty and it's molding and it's just stinking. And this experience was taking it out, washing it, drying it, folding it, and putting it back in the laundry. Not to remove the experience, but to process it.
Mm-hmm.
And this experience I've never had back pain since. I've never, like it, in a way, it was almost like I was leveling this dystopian city that I built inside me of coping mechanisms and fears and insecurities. And this substance allowed me to almost like demolish it and start to rebuild. And then my desire to continuously self-improve and explore and not leave a single rock unturned inside my psyche just kind of started to progress. And, I've spent the last 10 years exploring altered states of consciousness. And even within that time, I was electrocuted to death. And I had a very profound near death experience, which,
Wow.
from my perspective, was an endogenous release of dimethyltryptamine and 5-methyloxy dimethyltryptamine. And it in itself was very profound. And, and through this process of slowly unraveling and understanding the fragility in all of us, I think, has just led me to a place where I'm still a work in progress. We all are, but man, I just feel so much better all the time. The angst, that weird internal monologue of negativity is just sort of evaporated.
Wow. Wow. I mean, it's so profound to hear you describe your journey to your perception of consciousness. Because I always remind people, it's like, guess what? There's a million ways up the mountain. There is no right or wrong way. And I get this all the time, teaching people how to expand within, which some people would go, oh, we're going out, like an out of body experience. It's really internal. This is where the magic lies, right inside.
It really is. Like I've backpacked around the world, and like backpacked through Africa and Southeast Asia and India and all these places, and I was seeking something, and it took me to look inwards to realize what I was searching for. And looking inwards has been one of the most profound journeys I can ever even possibly express. It's Our inner complexity is so profound, and our interconnectivity with everything. And it's interesting, the idea that I know what you mean when it's people seeking external validation, seeking external journeys, and the mind of yourself is everything. By this very nature, like it's sort of an interesting statement. And with when I was died, I basically was dead for 11.5 minutes, was defibrillated twice, and I had a very profound experience. And one of the things that I came out of that with is that we're all facets of an infinite complexity experienced itself subjectively. And the purpose of this is to simply generate experience, to generate complexity, to know thyself. And we're all just the same thing moving in this perfect sequence of fractal energy and frequency.
Yeah, I mean, it's so poetic. It's beautiful because within Taoism, we just define the consciousness experience, the mother of all things, the Tao, as a diamond, and you're just looking at a different facet of that diamond. And that comes the realization of you and I are sitting at the same table. You're at one end, I'm at the other, and there's an object in the middle of the room, and you see it one way, I see it the other. You say tomato, I say tomato, but the experience of the connective, singular oneness that is consciousness is right there. We're all just experiencing a different facet.
And I think most people struggle is with their own notion of identity and this alienation that comes from believing that you're alone. And I guess part of this human experience is to befuddle your way through life. Like you're born as this somewhat pure energy, and you derive experience to give you identity. Like you're given a name, and you emulate your parents, and your behaviors are either enthusiastically encouraged or rebuked. And then you get into your peer groups, and you're constructing this thing through your life. And some people can continue constructing, and others at some point in time need to perhaps start deprogramming themselves. But it's inherent that you need to be programmed. You know what I mean? Like it's contradictory to assume otherwise.
Well, I mean, that's how the mechanisms work, right? It's like that's fundamentally the construct of conscious and unconscious behavior. Is there is a programming, there is that abyss that if you don't know how to work out through the labyrinth, how to realize that access of that. Well, within Taoism, we have three different shades of that: conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. You could argue the notion that there's really only two sides to the coin, but in reality, to work through that labyrinth and realize that you have access to pretty much doing anything. And when you access that moment we call wu wei, which is an effortless action within Taoism. Moreover, it's the wu ji, which is the stillness between the breath in and the breath out, which we refer to as yin and yang. That stillness is that moment, that now. And when you access that now, like that charge you just got up your spine right now, that connection that you and I have, and I'm just looking at your aura oscillating, it's kind of cool. But the whole point of it is that's the now. That's where you affect change. That's where you affect manifestation, healing, and
Yeah.
magic.
Like, I think that, you know, experience like matter can be destroyed. But yet the only thing that does exist is this single femtosecond of moments that turn into this vignette that is your life. And I think the stillness you're referring to, and maybe I'm wrong, is achieving a moment of just simply being and stopping the struggle of trying to enforce control on things around you that you really have no control over. And I believe in Taoism is this analogy of being in a river. It's like you can swim in the sides and you can struggle to get somewhere. You can just simply float and allow yourself to simply be. And that's a very difficult thing to do is relinquishing control on this innate sense of biological fear that is programmed into us for millions of years. And
Well, yeah.
it's
I was just going to say, I mean, you're speaking on something so simulated for 99% of people. Like we're having a dialogue that, generally speaking, if you captured this and published it to the world, 99% of the people that watched this video without the intent of understanding a level of consciousness would go, "What in Tao's name are they talking
I
about?"
know. Well, it's funny, like, so psychedelics, I'll give an example. And there's a misconception with psychedelics is that you do a psychedelic and you have this experience, but within that is like a psychedelics are like a bottle of vodka. You can have a drink and you can have a slight buzz, you can drink a little bit more, you can be inebriated, and then you can drink the whole bottle. You know what I mean? Like, there's a variety of different places, but each one is limited by the amount of fear that you
Mhm.
have of submitting to this space. And you know one of like when you actually drink the bottle, so to speak, if we're going to continue with analogy, is you start to very much blur the lines between your egoic identity and then your energetic identity, and then the like a unification identity of everything. And it's truly terrifying because I think a lot of the difference between what people perceive as Eastern philosophy and a lifetime of meditation is you earn this capacity to be in this state over lifetimes.
Well,
Whereas psychedelics, some people call it a cheat code, where you can just immerse yourself into this higher level meditated state. And I don't disagree with that idea, but you still need to learn how to be in that place, because if you don't learn how to accept and how to move with the river, then it can be a very, very chaotic experience.
I would have to agree, my friend. It's like a greater insight. I like to tell people that my awakening to my eternal immortal self within this lifetime over the last 30 years as a priest teaching people these internal alchemy practices. Before that, in the thousands of lives before this one, if you believe in reincarnation, if you believe in incarnation, how you want to define that very essence, a fleeting moment of your soul, your spirit is sampling consciousness. It's like you realize that, the second, I always tell people, it's like everything that I've acquired in relation to the mastery of moving energy, manifesting, healing, magic, all that kind of stuff over my natural born life. I always tell people that you can acquire that access instantaneously, and it can be contributed to the simplicity of understanding your neurology from the perspective of something as simplistic as mirror neurons, that you can basically replicate that experience that I'm having right now. Once you see it once, the old expression, you can't unsee it.
Unsee it.
And so that is now imprinted into your neurology. Your access point is realized. Moreover, something as simple as a 4-minute mile, once that got hit, all of a sudden people are like, well, if that person could do it, I could do it. And then within minutes, within days, there are people achieving these states of like seemingly superhuman only a few weeks before, because it's just a validation. And that's kind of like my journey
Yeah.
of helping people realize that.
It's one of the things I find with psychedelics and people who are trying to use them and talking to me about their experiences is that I don't think people realize how much we are standing in our own way. You know, like and much like you just made that reference, is that if I don't think I can accomplish something, I'm never going to be able to. You know, and getting out of your own way and allowing yourself to experience and explore something with the expectation within yourself that I can achieve this basically is somewhat limitless to some extent.
Oh, 1000%. And I then also agree with what you're talking about is replicating something. That's where the systems that I teach people, and they're really just systems, they're more integrated, that are passed down from generation to generation for thousands of years. So what happens is you jump on the bandwagon of ritual that has been imprinted with millions of people before you. So it's a validation of an access point. You're able to cultivate this internal alchemy, this energetic flow that we speak of, that is conceptual until otherwise, and that comes from experience. And so that development then gives you the ability to shift into this outer body, inner sight of realization that would fundamentally be something that most people would consider just conceptual. I read about astral projection. I read about out of body. I read about a near-death experience. That's why they're so popular these days, the near-death. People get very excited by the idea of it, but then they compartmentalize the thing, which I always refer to. If you're thinking, you're not knowing. If you're knowing, you're feeling. And that feeling is realized. And when that's realized, you understand what you're expressing and you can repeat it, because this is going to scare a lot of authoritarians right now. Your truth is the only truth you need to be concerned with.
And you're absolutely right about that. You know, like it's sort of interestingly and contradictory when you talk about and me talking about it, how we all think it is the idea that, you know, the inward journey, if you go far enough inward, you come out to everything. And when I think that's the ultimate realization, is that as you go so far into the depths of oneself, you get to a point where you simply realize that we are all a singular consciousness existing as one. And it's a very interesting thing to realize. And I guess just to go back a little bit when you were talking about reincarnation, you know, it's funny that I grew up Irish Catholic in Northern Ontario in the bush. You know what I mean? Like I had no concept of any of this stuff. And I've read hundreds of books in my life. I love reading. And you read about stuff like this, and it doesn't have meaning because I didn't grow up in that pivotal point in my life and development to explore that at a young age, to change my perception, to allow this to be something that's a reality. You know, we exist in North America, and there's this undercurrent of theocracy, this monotheism, this idea of this, you know, anthropomorphic being with a beard judging my movements and my beliefs, and this heaven and hell and all these different ideas. And whether you become atheist or agnostic after that, those things still linger inside you and control your perceptions. And I've had multiple experience on high dose psychedelics of past lives, and like millions of them. And it's a profound idea that I am just one facet of this singular energy that has been repeating itself in experience for millennia, quite possibly forever. And you know, it's both beautiful and somewhat terrifying. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I think
I'm
that's a
laughing
perfect
with you,
way.
my friend. I
Yeah.
want you to, it's really profound that you say these things, but it sort of brings me to the regressive moment within American history, as simplistic as, media, news network, talk radio, the evolution of Oprah, right?
Mm.
The beginning of sort of like talk radio in of itself within America. And she had on Deepak Chopra for the first time. And this was back in the 80s, whenever she had a show. And it sits in my mind always. I use it as a reference point. And back in the 80s, it's like the idea of, another state other than I got a 9-to-5 job, I got a grind, I get 2 weeks holiday once a year, and then I buy a house and I die. That's kind of the cycle of life that was sort of perceived, even though you have this seeping idea of through the generations, then the cycles within history, spirituality, atheism, religion, and you keep cycling through these things. There's an absolute onslaught to destroy the construct of religious belief system, only because people feel like they've been lied to. And that's a cycle of what people seem to forget. It's just like history in of itself. We forget very quickly that, Ice Ice Baby was not an original track, and Freddie Mercury,
yeah, Queen coined that. Yeah,
exactly. And so that was only a gap of 10 or 15 years, yet all of a sudden this is an original piece of material. This is how quickly we forget through generations. Oh, wow. So Oprah gets Deepak on there, and she's like, okay, we've got Deepak Chopra on the show, and everyone's, yay. And then he's sitting there, and she's like, hey, Deepak, how are you doing? And he goes, well, my body's here, but I'm not. And she went, I'll be right back after the commercial break.
Yeah.
Because that is just something too, even right now, as we speak about this in 2024, there are so many people that cannot wrap their mind around. I mean, I have conversations with people that are absolutely diehard Newtonian physics, believers, or quantum physics believers. Understand that it's like a football team. Go with what you love and you resonate with, because it's just a language of communication of your own consciousness, and there is no right or wrong way up the mountain. But people tend to go, it's all quantum physics. I mean, that's a really, really, really very, very new language in relation to something like Mandarin that I'm familiar with, or any indigenous, like ancient practice. So again, the way up the mountain is, I always tell people, all you need is an imagination, and everything, all bets are off. That's it.
Well, and the path up the mountain, it's not linear. It's winding, it's multidimensional. It's you take 5 steps forward, maybe 6 back, 1 forward, 4 back, 7 forward. Like you're taking this meandering path, and sometimes you hit a bluff or an impassable region. You got to go back down and go up a different way. And something interesting about quantum physics is, there's quite a few people within the quantum physics field that are starting to view quantum physics and the very strange, contradictory nuances within it as signs of, design, as signs of there is something more. Like, how can something be in a frame of possibility until observed? You
Right.
know what I mean? Like, what does it even mean? Like the double slit experiment. There's so many interesting contradictions within that. And I've read several books from quantum physicists talking about how, if if anything, the nuances in quantum physics show towards intelligent design or some complexity that exists from the fabric of the universe. And it's, I find that refreshing because, you can go back and Galileo and Sir Francis Drake and all these people, and we started entering these ideas of materialism and rationalism. And you can even take that back to the Greeks and even much before that. But we've created this entire system on explaining the reality in front of us and what we can see and what we can do with that. But there's an entire space within us that we still cannot even explain. Like, I've been to consciousness seminars and expositions, and I have friends who are neuroscientists, and the one thing that can all agree on is they don't know what consciousness is. And you're starting to see these more esoteric books coming out and ideas that perhaps consciousness is just a series of frequencies and vibrations that exist within a quantum field. And you're like, yeah, there's been a lot of people saying that already for thousands of years. I'm hoping that we're seeing this point in human history. Maybe not while I'm alive, who knows, but that we're gonna realize that the bridge between, Eastern philosophy and modern scientific exploration are not far one another. And much this, like the example you gave earlier, it's just different sides of the same thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting, for many decades I've been teaching these practices, these internal alchemy practices, rituals that go on and on and on. There's literally hundreds of them, and they all evoke an alchemical response in the physical body that is then tangible and repeatable within a 3D reality. But there was an interesting point where one of my students was, he's got a PhD. He works out of California, and he was doing some research, and they gave him this project to research the nucleus of a cell. And so for many years, there was this one practice what we call dantians. There's 3 of them. And then there's sprouts of that being other energy centers, more commonly known within other practices, chakras, perhaps. This dantian specifically has a certain activating process where you activate the 81 chambers within the dantian, and it evokes the death of a star, the rising of the red phoenix from the ashes, and the the opening of a black hole. And so this opens the abundant, timeless, endless, limitless energy, magnetic fluidity that has been going on within Taoism for thousands of years. Now, this sounds like some esoteric, interesting practice that could possibly be good under the influence of something. No. When you follow the direction, it becomes evoked and realized within this 3D reality. But more to the point of, I've been speaking of this black hole energy for a long time. Now, we talk about physics, and we talk about quantum physics, and how they reference this thing called 0-point energy, right? And
yes.
So the 0-point energy to the audience is basically the glue that holds the whole premise behind the entanglement of quantum in of itself. It is in everything. Now, it's conceptual to a lot of people, and within Taoism, it's just something that we reference and understand, because when you access and separate the electric from the magnetic, and you access pure magnetic flow, you can do anything, like pretty much anything. And so he comes back to me one day and goes, Shifu, you won't believe what I found inside the nucleus of a cell. I'm like, please do tell me. Black hole energy. And I'm like, oh, isn't that interesting? He goes, my head is about to explode. And I'm like, okay, is this surprising to you? Probably not. It shouldn't be, but it takes something where you validate it for yourself. It must be validated for yourself. So within his practices, he's been cultivating internal alchemy for many years, and was able to use it and validate it through his 3D reality, whether it be in manifestation, physical healing, magic, which is more a deeper understanding of the construct of manifestation. So you can be more specific to the outcome rather than just a general, leave it to the universe. The universe will
passive observer.
Right. And so understanding that connection, it just puts someone in a whole different state of reality. It's like, whoa, this is not just stuff that Seafood tells me is the reason why I'm able to do this stuff. I'm now able to access and validate it through what I consider language that's valuable to me. And that's why I find it so powerful what you do within your exploration of psychedelics is you're validating it through your own experience on a day-by-day basis. And it comes up in all different ways, shapes, or forms, that what you would perceive perhaps during your experience or what you've evoked using psychedelics is now flowing over into your 3D reality, and you're seeing these synchronicities, however they may find them, to your very expression.
And it is interesting because I feel like more often than not, people need this validation about those things as opposed to just simply living it. I've had psychedelic experiences before where it was, ego dissolution, and you literally become the fabric of the universe. And that changes you and imprints you. You come back, and in my monkey brain, my anthropomorphic body can't comprehend that, but exists within me as this change in the dynamic structure of me. And one thing that you were talking about before, the 0-point field, I think this shit is fascinating. And I will say this, and I feel like this is a great analogy for people, is like, your body's constructed of cells. Those cells are constructed of organelles. Those organelles are made of molecules. And molecules are made out of atomic structures, and you have quarks and gluons. But those things are really actually far apart from one another. And if you blew them up to a macro size, it would be football fields in between them. And the 0-point field is the space between everything. It's the canvas in which this pointillistic expression universe is painted on. We are mostly empty space. And when you really grasp that concept, it's quite profound. And this 0-point field, the space between everything, is infinite energy.
Because if you actually turned on every example of that, there would be no space between us. But it's so microscopic, it's beyond, it's subatomic, it's at a subatomic level. And so, people are like, oh my goodness. And you speak on something like where you shared with the universe. I'm doing that right now with my eyes open. And so the simulation of that is really interesting, because accessing that consciousness there is no backdrop. The backdrop for me is the universe. I'm sampling constellations, the sun, all moving through my physical body, and I'm getting high as a kite while talking to you. And it's really good to be me because I get to enjoy this now. And that's the part where you sort of refine your skills, because that's where I always go. I will say I'm biased, because the Qigong, the internal alchemy practice of that cultivation, gives you the consciousness to realize that and experience it by second basis. You don't have to be in a state of sort of like sleep paralysis, astral projection, OBE state where you got to lay down and drop everything, silence. This is how I'm going to get out to get in. Once you master it, and it's funny because I've seen this many times with other people that are very familiar with it, i.e., perhaps Tom Campbell refers to this, where he can access this state, with his eyes open. It's a brainwave that you can measure. Like for me, if I'm channeling or I'm doing anything that is a higher nature than this 3D reality, measured my brain waves. It's like, well, I'm 40 hertz and above. When I channel Latsu, which is one of my teachers that I use on a daily basis to give insight for many things, I'm between 100 and 200 hertz all day, every day. I look like I'm sweating like a pig in the sun, and that's an expression of the energy that I'm transmitting. Now, when you start to transmute it in a way that it's contained within the container, within Taoism, the constitution of your physical body that's brought into this reality, this reincarnation, however you want to put it, have a constitution. You look at your constitution as however your genetic makeup is, that gives you a number out of 100. Normally, most people start at about 70 or 80%, depending upon what they came in with from past generations. And then you sort of start playing with that. And that's the beautiful part about Taoist internal alchemy, is you bring the battery up to 100%, and then you go from 100 to 1,000, and then you saturate the physical body for the sole purpose of creating longevity within this reincarnation, to expand your consciousness as much as you can. So it's a little fundamentally different than perhaps a Buddhist perspective, because Buddhists, this is how I use the variably the difference between Buddhism and Taoism. Buddhism is a pile of dirt covered in diamonds, and they spend their journey taking another dirt off and looking for more. Another diamond, looking for more dirt. And whereas a Taoist is a pile of diamonds covered in dirt, we just remove more dirt, find another diamond, and it's good to be me. And I mean, that sort of reflects. Yeah.
Is that, in Buddhism, to some extent, this endless cycle of existence is suffering. And the idea is to be aware of that moment in death and achieve a state of nirvana and escape the shackles of this persistent existence. Is Taoism different in that perspective? Like, is life the end goal of celebration, or is breaking free from the cycle of pain?
Well, I mean, when I was using the vast polarizing differences, they look for the dirt under the diamond. We take the dirt off and find another diamond. So the resonation is understanding to use this vehicle as a nourishing point. And when you start mastering soul projection, Shen projection, which is what we call it, there's sort of a level of elevation. It's matter, Qi being energy, Shen being spirit, Wu Ji, the stillness, and finally the mother of all things, Tao. And these are just gradients of consciousness. If I had to water it all down for someone who's looking on the outside, looking in, understanding how to get into those states of consciousness and affect a change. So we're talking about fundamental things that transmute into, telekinesis, clairvoyant senses, mediumship channeling, all that kind of stuff. I put it under one blanket of sensory perception. And once you start getting a handle on that, and you're able to transmute the energy, because the fundamental fallacy of the experience of energetic expansion is that when you ascend, it becomes so paper thin that you just can't feel anything. That's just a fundamental lie when you start cultivating energy. Now, I will affirm that everyone has their own experience. And, if someone is falling into the pathway that they want to start generating these type of practices and applying them to their reality through osmosis, really. You're going to experience and generate what it is that I'm giving to you as a baseline. But then you take that magic of understanding how to transmute the energy and you go off and create your own reality, because once you get those fundamentals, you don't have to second guess whether you're experiencing it or not. It's really happening to you because you can transmute a healing. Like, for example, I've seen so many physical healings, I can't even put a number on it anymore over the last 30 years. And I've seen it all. Cancer disappear, gangrenous tissue reform itself as just pink flesh and blood. I've seen it all. And so, how does that transmute into your reality? It's a state of consciousness. And so, an example, what's a great one? Just a flash in the pan drive-by healing. My two kids are chasing each other. One of them trips and they eat dirt, right? Bang, big swollen lip. I show you that you can transform that in front of your very eyes in the same second that it came in, and you watch it disappear. And this is the present moment. You have to be in the present moment. Nothing has title. I'm not sitting there going, I'm the daddy. Oh my goodness, is my child all right? I'm not sitting there, hang on a second. Can you wait? I need to get in the lotus position. Let me light 3 incense and call in my guides and my guardians and my angels. And I need to be enveloped in this, angelic light. No. When you get there, nothing has title. You are that fabric of the universe that you speak of, that you experience. And that's when you create change. So when you're there, all of a sudden, guess what? You're asking yourself, if you're the universe, you don't go, excuse me, universe, can you affect change right now? And it's like, that's not how it works. You think it and it becomes reality, but that's that present moment. And then how do you know you're there? Because you're able to transmute change before your very eyes. And that's only validated through internal alchemy practices from my experience. That's how I've been able to replicate it and teach people how to do that, is they must be able to cultivate the inner alchemy, the architecture that's within your physical body, that is the energetic architecture. And that sort of like has been validated just through the simplicity of Chinese medicine and, just referencing the 12 meridians that are access points that have been accepted universally throughout the world as a form of alternative healing to some degree. But, when the Yellow Emperor was given the whispers of the universe many thousands of years ago, the guy who transmuted that information and created Chinese culture as we know it today, Chinese medicine was one of those aspects. And he had actually a real affinity with the cultivation of energetics, which is the most powerful aspect of any branch of Chinese medicine. The most powerful is the energetics. And when you start and you know how to cultivate it, it becomes real. It's not just like an experience. Oh my goodness, it was so amazing. I felt that I went into the room. This person has bad energy. I don't like it. This person has good energy. I went to a space. I really enjoyed the energy. This is a universal language that people don't even realize they're speaking of. I've had conversations with Christians that are devout Christians that don't believe in the very nature of energy, especially one man being able to cultivate it. Yet I can call them up on the very notion and the absence of their understanding that you're using that very language in their describing their reality. Oh, I didn't realize I was using that, because that's the unconscious. And so when you access the unconscious, all of a sudden, oh, now we start to see change. And I believe that that's probably a catalyst for your continual discovery within, using psychedelics to open that consciousness. And I think it's profound. I think it's amazing. Honestly, I always tell people, it's like, it becomes useful until it doesn't. People are like, oh my goodness, I'm drinking too much. I'm like, if it is associated with a satisfaction that you're having, then no, it's not. It's the second you see, when you have the old story about Grandpa Joe was 110 and he drank a bottle of whiskey and five packs of cigarettes a day and he ate red meat and he did all these things. And I said, that's not just a one-off. He captured the state of now. He understood the state of now. It doesn't matter. I always tell people, you can do 1,000 miles on the treadmill, eat kale, do nothing but, attempt to conceptualize the idea that you are a good person. But it comes right back to the scriptures of the Tao Te Ching. If you act in virtue, you have none whatsoever. The simplicity of that is all things. This is where you get the state of now to realize the power of who you are. And you are the universe. That fabric that you spoke of is everyone's access point, and they can experience it at all times. You mentioned that, your fundamental deconstruction and all the things that unravel. I would refer to that as more commonly within a lot of spiritual practices, as they call it, the death or the dark night of the soul. And I've come across people that have experienced that for years. We're not talking about 5 minutes. Now, I personally, through my own journey and realization of my eternal immortal self, 30 years ago, had my dark night of the soul over about a week. And within the teachings that we have within Taoism, you can have up to 9 within one lifetime. But I have yet to experience another one. But that unraveling felt like every thought, every feeling, every emotion experienced right now, and it doesn't end until it ends. And so you're in an experience that would be more reflective of, I attribute it to, many people have explained to me the simplicity of eating marijuana, and they go to sleep and wake up and they're still stoned. Well, that would be probably the closest thing that I could correlate not having experience in psychedelics, in, altering drugs outside of the ones that I can help you create. This would be my, I don't know how that happens. It happens at every podcast. Very weird. It just comes up.
It seemed aptly timed.
Yeah, so, right. So yeah. This gathering is so exciting for me, because you are entering into a consciousness shift that you're obtaining through the very journey that you're having, and it's never ending. I would just say that the emotional content is something that is a simulation of a humanist experience, which is part of the duality, which is absolutely beautiful. Some people go, look, I re-upped, I talked to my soul, I had a soul review. These are very common these days. It's almost like a psyop. A lot of people are talking in the same stance, because when you get out past what you perceive as your three-dimensional reality, all bets are off as what is generated. I don't experience the same things that other people experience, Akashic records, other things. These are all related to how you perceive your reality, and there's no right or wrong way how you perceive it. It's right happening to you as you step forward, step inward, and that is realized. And I think a lot of people get caught up in my football team is the best football team. Go Raiders, or whatever, instead of realizing that, you and I are having this incredible epiphany and realization of how similar the journey is, and that awareness and validating each other with our own experiences, how profound it is. And it only gets greater. It's like it edges open a consciousness that whatever universal force that is driving you to come to this realization, whether you believe in God, universe, Buddha, Tao, whatever it is, Allah, Jehovah, whatever, or just you. Maybe it's just you. That's all you need. It's a sense of something greater than what's before us. It generates this incredible, I don't know. It's like I cannot get enough of experiencing and realizing how profound this present moment is, and that anyone, as long as you have a nervous system and you have an imagination, you can access this, and you can be present, you can be realized, you can be all-knowing, all-powerful. And that's not a highly driven testosterone word of powerful that needs to be recognized from an authoritarian as, you can't possibly tell people they can think their own way. Oh, yes, I can. And they realize it. See, what are your thoughts on that?
I find, well, there was a lot to unpack just there, but yeah, I find that, when you talk about the idea of accessing this information, if it did raise your ego or raise your sense of power as an individual, then you're probably not actually experiencing that. To me, like, all the information, all the knowledge I've gained from psychedelics about myself and myself being an extension of the universe has been profoundly humbling. It's the idea that, like, a lot of people will do psychedelics or do self-exploration and realize they're God, but then they stop and they don't do it enough to realize that so is everyone else.
Well,
And that
it's more an archetype, right? People have got a conception that the universe has a moral compass. It does not. All the construct of how you perceive things. So when I say all powerful, you just access it. It's like the only demise of an individual or their simulation is they fall prey to duality and the construct of that. So people are like use the word karma, and they use it in the sense of
I think I've heard 4 people use karma in the appropriate context in my life. Like it blows my mind. Oh, that's karma. I'm like, that's actually not karma at all. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, it replicates in their very reality, right? Because it's predicated on how they perceive reality. It only works on that. So if you walk under a ladder and you believe you're going to have good luck, then you will have good luck. That's the present moment. If you walk on a ladder and you believe you're going to have bad luck will find you. It's that the universe is like, sure, next, what do you want? A milkshake and a hamburger with that? Let me send it right to you. And that's that moment of access. And that's the part where, unless you experience it, it's conceptual for most people, and everyone has access to it. There isn't an exception to the rule. I do the things that I do and teach people the things that I do to get them to evoke an inner power within them, realizing they are one with all things. But ego in of itself, again, is a construct of humanness. It's again, people go, hey, guess what? What's happening with 2024? Everyone has a prediction. When I ask Lao-Tzu, who's my teacher, who was basically the image of a human that transcribed the Tao Te Ching that we know today from the universe, the reality is he's quite simple. He answers this. It's like, until otherwise, you are literally asking a grain of sand, asking the beach, what are we doing today? And so the separation is there. It's there. It's not, you are not all knowing. And that's that part where all that stuff, a title, an emotional state, all these things are all human based sort of stuff that you've been given the tools to use. It's like underwear, but you can also access this state of consciousness that goes up and beyond all realized states that you believe are simulated within a human experience. Does that make sense?
It does. Like, I have the belief that, we're evolved monkeys, basically, going back from this long line of various mammals and this single common ancestor. And you take that a step back, and all these, different species, and there, because stems from a single organism that took a bunch of inanimate objects, put itself together, and then started to replicate. And within that is contained incredible amounts of biology and programming that we are all trying to work against to establish ourselves and really truly figure out our actual identity. But at the end of the day, like, we stem from primates. Our closest ancestors are bonobos and chimpanzees, and they both have very different social dynamics. But within that is a sense of self and a sense of hierarchy that they use to function together as groups. And that might be an evolutionary trait that provided security and safety in mammals, and that's a continuation. And now here we are, having this conversation and talking about the absence of self and the disillusion of self, and the idea that we can move towards this higher state of being. That's quite profound. You know what I mean? Like, Samuel Johnson said that one must make a beast of himself to get rid of the pain of being a man. And I think that can be taken in a multitude of different ways. And one of them is just the idea that we have the capacity to look and philosophize and realize our true nature. It's just a matter of getting past all of this biological programming of hierarchies and structure and this physical reality that you must exist in to then work around. And I think it's this slow meandering path. And I sometimes wonder, like, in your perspective, is there a point where humanity can supersede our biological restraints and become aware without having, like, that becomes a commonplace? Like, if we evolve to be social species, we evolve to have these instincts, can we evolve to simply just be this way without the work? Or is the work the relevant part about it?
Well, I would say that that in of itself is the mind trap. Just
Yeah,
that
right.
word, just that word in of itself. It's sort of like if you sort of unravel that, it's interesting how you reference the primal evolution from troglodyte to what we perceive now as our human form. They're debating the actual validation of what's really within the DNA strand of a human being and how long that construct has existed within time. And now they're pretty much throwing that whole thing bathwater out with the baby, and that they're attempting to
Are
validate.
they though? Are
They're
they
attempting to
throwing
validate.
DNA,
Well,
deoxyribonucleic nucleic acid, as a mechanism for storing information and evolution?
well, they're not throwing it out, but they're being very confident in saying that the DNA structure that we have now has been evident and hasn't changed in 200,000 years. So that's
Well,
an interesting
here's the
perception.
thing too, though, is if you look at evolutionary timeframes, 200,000 years is not even a flash in the pan. Like, how long does it take to evolve? How long does it take to grow flippers or decide I want to be amphibious as opposed to aquatic or be terrestrial? These things take millions of years. And now, I'm not going to dispute whether it's unchanging, progressively moving, the ideas of male and female and genetic manipulation and so forth. But I would say is that I think a perfect system to derive complexity comes from a biology that we exist in. If there was ever a purpose that I think is the universe, is to simply increase in complexity and know thyself and become thyself and generate experience, whether that's physical, immaterial, emotional. I think everything is stored.
That's really profound in of itself. It's like from me, I always teach people this is the baseline of where you start. Your emotions don't control you, you control your emotions. And people are like, whoa, that's kind of testosterone like. And then I'll go with, you're the master keeper creator of your reality. And then they're like, whoa, hang on, next minute you're going to tell me all thoughts of my mind are not yours. Actually, they're not. And then you get into this tongue twisting reality of, hang on, whoa, you're starting to melt my brain with these things that are hitting me. But in reality, that's the thing that holds you to the limitation that you believe from a day-to-day basis, that your emotion is real. It's just a simulation of a past experience that you've generated to recall and reference as your reality right now. Whereas when you separate those, because wisdom in of itself is being able to realize a story that you've had that doesn't have an emotion and a feeling attached to it. It's now wisdom. You can reference it and recall it as a moment of awareness. Whereas people get caught in that trap with for everything. When I teach someone, everything is a thought, feeling, and emotion. That's it. That's your reality. That's all. And so when you are able to take that thought that is previous, that you can recall in your mind, and remove the emotion and the feeling, it becomes wisdom. It becomes
I completely agree.
expansion.
Actually,
And yeah. No,
I was just going to say, like, the last thing you just said, I 100% agree with, in the idea that, whether it's yours, ancestral, this long lineage line, like you have these common narratives that move forward. And those common narratives are experienced with emotion attached to them. And the moment you can remove the emotion from it, it becomes an unbiased form of wisdom. But the moment the attachment is there with emotion, then it has that line where you're pulling it into something that it's not. Because my angst, sadness, happiness, that doesn't really exist. It's a biological construct. It's my body telling me I'm happy, horny, sad, hungry, angry. It's jealousy. It's all these things. And when you can remove that from that experience, it becomes perfect wisdom.
I mean, it's beautiful, because this is the scale of awareness that I use for people, because everyone goes, once you realize your love and your just abundance, you're resonating with the universe. Well, love in of itself is very subjective until otherwise noted, until otherwise realized, and you raise your vibration to create a frequency that is up and beyond what you're experiencing. It is subjective. So that means that love to you might mean razor blades and bunny rabbits, and to me it's unicorns and rainbows. It's very subjective until otherwise.
It is. It's subject to the experiences that I've had and subject to my own emotional state that allows me to feel that. And I've said many times that you can only love something to the capacity that you love yourself. And that's a very self-limiting factor, and that ebbs and flows as you progress through life. And it might mean that you are only capable of loving a lot less due to a series of traumatic events that prevent you from actually experiencing that. Or quite the opposite, is letting go of the emotion attached to experience to then actually experience more.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, that's why I like the entry level of gratitude, because you can quickly have someone universally accept that. You either give someone a compliment, you hand them $5, they all understand that as a resonance that is more commonly accepted as an entry level. And then, of course, you move that grade up to accepting all things and allowing all things that merges from the gratitude aspect. But that's always an entry. Love is probably the most fundamentally confusing definition of what reality is, yet people always
like it. They like it. It sounds good. It feels good to say. There's a positive emotional association with it, and fine. But yeah, you're right. Love is profoundly subjective. There's a compound called 5-MeO-DMT, or 5-methyloxydimethyltryptamine. It's present in our brains right now. It's produced in the pineal gland, as well as DMT. And in higher doses, there's something called an infinity experience. And it's experiencing the true nature of infinity in this single crystalline point of absolute perfection. And it is mind-blowing. And you can't exist as a self, as an egoic identity, to experience that because of the limitations of our capacity to experience. And it's almost like this entire universe is a single point of absolute perfection. And we're all viewing it differently from different lenses, trying to figure out how to understand that single point, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned. Go ahead.
No, that's good, man.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you're funny you mentioned that. What do you coin it? Infinite
infinity experience. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Because we actually have a cultivational practice that polarizes a Kundalini equivalent. And it's called the infinite Wuji body experience. And so you evoke what we call the sacred infinite flower within your upper dantian, and through breath and through other internal alchemy practices, you get high as it.
And that's something that we briefly talked about. The idea, it's Michigan University did a bunch of studies where they're using rat brains, because obviously you can't drill into a human brain because of ethical concerns. And a rat brain is a reasonable.
Really? No,
I don't know, who knew, right? It depends what country you're in, I guess.
Yeah.
And they were doing sampling of cerebrospinal fluid, and it showed that, DMT, or dimethyltryptamine, is present in our brains to the same capacity that serotonin or dopamine is. And that in points of death, you have a 6-fold increase of DMT in your system. And things like holotropic breathing, the Wim Hoffman method, and a lot of things I feel like you're describing would be an endogenous release of these compounds of 5-MeO-DMT and NN-DMT. And so that infinity experience that you're referencing, I would imagine, is probably relatively similar. It's just honing the capacity to have that release in your own body. And, for me, when I had my near-death experience, it was a perfect biological release of my own endogenous compounds to allow me to have that experience. It's a very profound thing that we have these capacities to move from what we perceive as physical reality into an energetic state. And I think in some senses, people try to boil it down to it's just a chemical state. It's just a chemical release. However, that profound state of being far transcends any just simple chemical release. And it makes you wonder the nature of our biology that allows us to have that. Rationalists would argue that the release of DMT during a death experience is neuroprotectant because it saves your neural cells from hypoxia. But yet you're having a transcendent experience, this out-of-body state, a merger with the universe, a merger with consciousness of the universe. It's hard to wonder why there's an evolutionary process that would do that. Evolution, if you boil down evolution, the only thing evolution is little benefits that allow me to have sex and procreate. And then I fucking die and no one cares. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing in evolution after that. It's me surviving long enough to procreate, a continuation of my genetic material so that it can adapt and then procreate again. So why do we have these capacities within our brain to have these divine states of being that arguably make us less able to function in a profoundly violent environment? And those are sort of interesting questions that I sometimes use with myself, and that I feel like you're exploring with your own personal practice.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is. It's sort of like repeating this type of stuff where you can. It has to be validated. That's part of the humanist, is this ability to the hetero action of what we start, we must finish. It's a behavioral thing that's within the human being. And then when you realize that that's just a program, you move it aside, and then you start getting down with the get down and realizing the true nature of reality, which is all things. And so then all of a sudden that's just to experience your day to day, however you choose to. But every time you want to be one with all things, you flip a switch, and then that can be tangible. Just like, like I said, I'm out in the universe getting high as a kite, actually sampling the moon energy right now, including I just finished Earth. And so how would that be described in a physical related neurological effect? Because this is still a tuning fork. As much as people go, you're going out, you're going in, there's a registered experience that's taking place, whether you may feel that you're not of this body. There is a simulation that you're referring to, a feeling that may not be related to the physicality, but you're experiencing it. It's a register that you can access at some point. This is what happened. And so the feeling is my whole body is engulfed with like ridiculous amount of energy, as if I'm standing over a fire hydrant, and every possible euphoric sort of sense of saturation is taking place in my physical body right now. And so my intention can bring me to that place at will. And it wasn't until I listened to Tom Campbell describe his experience that I felt very grateful that there was someone else out there that also experiences that state of consciousness. And really, you evoke a brainwave, as much as I want to get back to the biology, because if you physiology, biology, neurology, it's very limited in of itself. If you're coming from that place, you're limited. That's just your baseline of where you jump off. But being able to experience it is a whole nother ball game. And that's where people, they stumble across these types of things, myself, someone else, whoever, and when they get a taste of it, it never leaves them. They just keep opening the door, just as you're pursuing your realization, your conscious awareness. Everyone has their own path, and there's no right or wrong. Like I said, you could drink a bottle of whiskey a day and live to 120. It wouldn't make a difference. It's the state that you're in and your value and awareness. People seem to forget that. It's like, once you lose sight of that, that's really how they get you. And you're like, well, what's the bigger? What do you mean how they get you? Well, there's a construct that consciousness is operating from this humanist for a purpose of. Okay, people have these perceived notions of how and why you're in here. You're here to experience this stuff. Consciousness gathers more. Well, let's just say this. If you're experiencing this as a human being, there are traits of that humanist that you have to acknowledge. This is the vehicle, the tuning fork for this reincarnation, if you accept there is one. And that means that you're gathering as much expansion as possible if you're aware of it. If you're not, you're John Smith that works a 9 to 5, gets old, buys a house, and dies. I mean, that's the cycle of the programming, the psyop within society, within human, history. This is how we do it. How do we create this? I mean, people are still living on Darwin's theory, and we're experiencing it right now. And people are like, what are you talking about? He discovered 3 things that he observed about reality that he chose to ripple out into the very reality you're operating in right now. And they're like, well, what are you talking about? Have you ever heard the expression survival of the fittest? Yeah, I use that all the time. That was one of Darwin's greatest hits. He just tossed it out there. It's like a realization. How is that still replicating hundreds of years later? And you don't even understand the nature or where it came from, yet you use it in your everyday life to perceive reality. So then there's that homeostasis that was observed, that was then thrown out into the field of reality, imprinted into the very DNA that we speak of. Moreover, we're all numbers, symbols, letters, words, and that's a reflection of our DNA expression. And when you start getting into that, then you go down the epigenetic route. Then you start realizing, oh my goodness, I'm a product of my environments. My thoughts can turn on and off my gene expression. And then with a thought, feeling, and emotion, you generate this alchemical response from the pineal, pituitary, and thalamus, creating this electric biochemical experience that uses the culture medium that is the blood to the messenger, turning on and off your gene expression, then transmitting into the field of possibilities, meaning something equal to or greater than, realized as all things, manifestation, magic, or healing. Let the fun begin as Harry Potter. I just that, because anything's possible. And I believe that you also believe that.
I do. When you reference epigenetics, I'm like, I completely think that our current states, our emotional states, our self-destruction, I've said this many times, it's like, the vast majority of us would never tolerate being in a relationship who speaks to us the way that we speak to ourselves. And if you tell something it's a piece of shit enough times, it will truly believe it. And I think that in itself is a bigger cause of comorbidities and inflammation and cancers and all these various things that plague us and again, we reference psyops, is the psyops of advertising, the psyops of convincing us that we're inadequate on a daily basis so that we'll contribute to a capitalist society, so that I'll get a dopamine release when I buy something new. And it constantly keeps us on this hamster wheel where we're always needing to somehow find external self-improvement, where that self-improvement is inside of us completely. And you can turn off these genes within inside us and change ourselves and achieve self-healing in a variety of different things simply by the energy that we put into the system that we inhabit. And I think so many people, I'm okay, I'm fine. And I'm like, no, yep, no one is. You know what I mean? Like you're breathing out angst and stored energy from multiple existences, and it's just these common narratives through millions of years. And how do we change that? And to me, like, psychedelics and your own personal exploration are not far off from one another. To me, psychedelics is going into an altered state of consciousness as a catalyst to evoke emotional change within yourself, and then the space between is you trying to embody that change. Leave no stone unturned. Go within yourself and find all of these things, these inadequacies, insecurities, and fears, the existential notions of existence that permeate, conscious beings. It's an arduous uphill battle, but yes, it is. Everyone's uphill journey is different.
I would say that is also a construct of your reality. I always tell people, you want to become psychic within the next couple of seconds, listen to the linguistics of the person in front of you and the words that come out of their mouth, transmute the subconscious true essence of how they perceive reality. So when you add things like work and hard and struggle, these are all part of your experience. And so then they ripple out into the present moment. That's why when you put it out there, it's realized. And so, how do you master that? Well, absolutely, quite easily. It's not difficult when you understand how to separate it. I can be in my personality and access high levels of consciousness that affect change in a 3D reality. And that's where people go, yeah, right, okay. I mean, just an example of the construct of that. Just recently, I had I was driving. I went over the speed limit a little bit. I had my whole family in the car. I went over like 10 miles. This cop pulls me over. And my personality was like, this is ridiculous. Well, you're wasting my time. I have a focus. I've got to get somewhere. Okay. And so he approached the vehicle with a lot of fear. Like, I'm looking at his fear and his anxiety. He's like, roll the windows down. Like, I've got my kids in the car, my wife, and it's like he's acting like he's just, he's about to approach some perp that's going to, open fire on him. And then he had his hand like sitting on his firearm as if, he needed to be concerned. And my personality was not tolerant. I do not erase my personality. And I was like, you know what? Is there a reason why you feel the need that you might in your mind think you want to draw on myself and my family? And he just like, you've got to understand, when you can see the energy that circulates within a physical body, you have the ability to poke the bear per se, because that emotion then exacerbates. Now that's me entertaining my personality self, but I felt it was unnecessary that he approached that whole thing the way he did. So then I was like, listen, I want to see the radar. I don't believe you. And my wife's looking at me like, you
shut up.
You need to be quiet. And I'm like, no, I'm not in the mood today. I'm like, you need to show me that. Give me your license and registration. I'm going to write you a ticket. I'm like, oh, really? And in the same second that I entertained my personality, I also cast magic. And so what does that really entail? Well, when you condense the access to high levels of consciousness, you alter this now, and you can do it instantaneously through practice. And so he went off to go and write me a ticket, comes back, and he hands me my license and registration. He said, thank you, sir. I'm just going to let you off with a warning. Don't do that next time. And with the intention to go one way, where I poked the bear, I incited his personality. I was not having any mercy upon him at all in his own construct of his personality that was plaguing him to react to everything. Because I always remind people, when you're emotional, you're suggestible. That is the entry point to the gateway of your unconscious. If you want to change, that's how quickly you can. And of course, that state of consciousness, people will go, well, how did you do it? It's a shift of consciousness. So however that transmuted to his reality, he walked back to his patrol car, did whatever he did, came back and gave me a warning where he had the intention, full intention, of writing me a ticket. Now, when you can shift that, and that was a conscious shift, that's just a state of awareness. And and you have to be able to feel it. It's palpable. It's not something like, oh, let me put it out there. Universe, help me out, please. I don't want a ticket. Please help me. That's the biggest mistake people make, is the emotional content. Once you realize you can take the emotional content, put it aside, then you start manifesting things instantly. Have you ever heard of the parking fairy?
No.
Okay. This is a wet your whistle, Harry Potter in training example. You can use that right now. Is in your mind, you'll go, oh, look, San Qing told me about this thing. You know what? I'm going to go for a drive. I'm going to go down to my local supermarket or whatever, and I'm going to put out the thought form, I want a parking space right in front. And so you get this idea in your mind, and you're thinking, there's no judgment. No one, I don't really care. I mean, this is kind of stupid. I don't really care. It doesn't mean anything to me. I don't really care about the outcome, but I'll just think it, because he said that all you have to do is think it and it will be materialized. And so because you're not subject to judgment, you haven't told a bunch of friends, hey, look, I'm doing this training where this crazy Taoist guy told me to go to wherever my destination is, think about a parking space and it will materialize. And all of a sudden, it happens. And then it happens again. And then it happens again. And then after the 47th time, you're like, you know what? I'm going to call San Qing right now. I need to give him a call, and I need to go, hey, there's something to this, because I've done it 47 times and I've had this own dialogue in my mind, haven't shared it with anyone, so I haven't been subject to scrutiny, to thought forms, to emotional content, and it keeps repeating itself. Now, that is the essence of all manifestation. That's the essence of all magic. That's the essence of all healing, is this present moment. And the emotional content is not there. But when you want something big, like a Lamborghini, a trip around the world, $1 million in your bank account, the hot boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, whatever, you unfortunately attach the emotion to the event. And that's where all this subject to, I need to unravel certain things within the deep inside the seed of who I am, is very relevant, but then it isn't. Because you can remove this emotional and feelings from the physical tissue, which is the premise of ancient Taoist practices, more commonly within Chinese medicine. You evoke the emotion, you remove the emotion, and it reveals the virtue. is how you create homeostasis within the physical body using the meridians, energetic in of itself. But this is the state of how you access that stuff. And I know you're probably like, I've actually done that. I was driving and I just wanted someone to move out of my way. I was like, you know what? I really wish someone would move out of, and they just move out of the way. Now, capturing that and realizing you can do that at will with anything is now a process perhaps to some people. Even though that's the very foundation of all things, is this present moment. And when you realize you are the universe, this can be realized. And, you know, some people, I had one guy on the podcast the other day, and he's like, I was told by my guides, I need to come here and I need to experience the human experience, and I need to know what pain and suffering is. Perfect. As one of my favorite Real Housewives of Atlanta would say, Nene, you do you, honey, and I'll do me. And that's really the sum of all things. And so, you know, people get to this. It's structured in this and that, and absolutely, it can be as layered, as complex as you want. But the second you get a taste, just like you have many times over through your journey, it makes you explore more, and it makes you realize that there is no end to what we're experiencing, and this humanness is the tip of the eye. That this is nothing. But what the biggest fallacy is that you can't alter this in any way, shape, or form. That's the mistake that people make, because once you access that consciousness, you can apply it now. You can apply it in this 3D reality that everyone else is operating in, which makes it a hell of a lot easier for you. But, you know, more collectively, take a group of 8 people, put them in a room. I normally do 9. And when I do a group healing, which can go anywhere from 9 to 1,000 people, you connect the energy, and whatever you bring into that space, you are able to affect change. You affect change. So all of a sudden, I've got a mental, emotional issue. I've got a physical problem. You come into a group environment where everyone has the same consensus. They're in the same mindset. The rippling effects of that is unlimited healing. And we're not doing anything. We're just connecting collectively with the same mindset that someone might be caught up in a psyop where they believe that all these other things are happening in their limited reality. But now you're going greater. You're bringing your stuff in, and you're like, everyone has the same perception. I want a healing. And it's generated. And you're like, woo! How is that possible? Well, it comes back to the construct of how you and I understand the mechanisms at a much deeper level. And then they're able to be translated into this 3D reality. And it's like, how far do you go? You just have to validate it. It just has to be validated by you. And then it becomes realized. It's nothing more than that. It's just like, until you validate it for yourself, it means nothing. It's just, oh yeah, he's running his mouth. Whatever. Okay. That's good. I like that idea. But when you can go and go, oh, parking fare, you don't even ask the parking. I just use that as an analogy. But you think, hey, I want this, without the emotional content, not being judged by anybody, and all of a sudden it happens to you, and you do it 40 times. You go, there's something here. There's definitely something. I attribute my realization to keeping everything simple, childlike in its nature, everything at face value. The first time I ever meditated over 30 years ago, I sat in a room. This teacher said to me, all right, sit in a lotus position. I'm like, I can't do that. I was like physically not capable of doing that. I was a big muscular bodybuilder. Impossible. Couldn't do it. I looked like an ape, an overgrown ape trying to contort my body. So I'm like, my back is hurting. Everything's hurting. And she said, sit down there. Now we're going to start meditating. Never heard of meditation before. I just picked up a lot of things, crushed them, threw them around like the Incredible Hulk. And that was my realization. I go, okay, sit there. And she goes, we're going to go into meditation. I want you to just relax and close your eyes. I'm like, really? I'm in some, what would perceive as like a local rec room, a public space where there's noise on the outside, ambulances, taxis, all this weird stuff is going on. It's a distraction. And I'm thinking, there's no way I could do this thing that they call meditation, which is, I don't know what it is yet, but I don't know. And then she said, guess what? Just sit there. Now close your eyes. Now, all I want you to do is take a deep breath in and let everything just fade away. And I was like, in my mind, I'm like, this is ridiculous. I can't do this. I'm in pain. I inhaled and everything went silent. And I was like, I am onto something. I have never experienced anything like this in my life. This is profound, to shift my consciousness instantaneously like that. And all the sound disappeared. It doesn't exist. It's gone. And I mean, I just had a guest on 2 days ago, and she's 86 years old. She lived through tremendous historical events over her lifetime, and she's been heavily involved in out-of-body experience for decades. And she used to, as a child, be literally, her bedroom would be like set right next to a gun range, and she never heard a gunshot go off once. And her father's like, you know, we're going to start shooting outside. Never heard a word, never heard a bang, never heard a sound. And it's like that state of consciousness, which you're very familiar with when you get into this state, however you get into your state, through that gateway, you can transmute and change anything you want at will. That's that incredible experience. And it's like very much like attracts like. So what does that mean? It means that if you're drinking, go ahead.
Sorry, I just hate to interrupt you, but I have to go very soon. My wife's leaving. I got to get my daughter.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, we'll definitely address this again, because I'm absolutely amazed at your insight, and I really appreciate you and you know, just what you're contributing and what you're sharing, because it only takes one person to listen to your story and they open their gateway. So
yeah, that was my thought as well.
Yeah. And so again, I want to thank you, my friend, for spending time with myself and the audience today. One quick question before we leave: what is your definition of consciousness?
Consciousness, as we experience an individual, is a small segmentation of just universal consciousness existing within my biology as a mechanism for exploration and experience.
I love it. For me, that's beautiful. It's the true nature of all things. To the audience, I might have to decipher it, but it might look like I have to transcribe it into sort of English, but that's it. That's all things. It's Could you give someone a layman version that they could grasp?
I kind of feel that is, I don't know. It's hard to say, right? Like, it's, the universe is conscious. The universe exists as this perfect complexity of intelligence, and we're all just this segment of it, parceled off and working through my biology, working through the biology of my brain, my body. And I am just experiencing the universe through that, experiencing itself from this interesting subjective notion of separation.
Beautiful, my friend. And in closing, would you like to share with the audience? I'm going to put all your social under this podcast, but would you like to share with the audience what you're doing currently right now? What are your offerings?
I have a podcast on most major platforms called Tapped into Psychedelics, where I'm just talking to doctors and scientists and neuroscientists and veterans and different people and their experience and how they've used psychedelics to work through their traumas, experience higher states of consciousness and existence. And, you know, I feel like that's the offering that I can provide, is hopefully allowing other people to hear something that starts some catalyst inside themselves and makes them look externally a little bit further around the room and maybe find some solace in themselves.
Well, you've definitely got a new fan right here, and I'm greatly appreciative to the universe, to the Tao, that you've come into my life and created a new friendship. And with that said, in closing, I want to thank the audience. I want to thank you for the time you spent here today. And I am your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master Sun Qing, and I will see you on the next one, guys.